Hello, this is Cotton Stoops, and today's video is the final 2022 tier list of Lumian Legacy. This video will both serve as a basis of what we're going to be looking in the forward future of Lumian Legacy's metagame and a final result of what's metagames that we've been experiencing for the past year. Do note that everything here is in my opinion, and I do have a lot of strong opinions about a lot of Lumians, so just know, as long as you listen to me, maybe it will make sense, but argue with me in the comments down below, that is fine as well. Let me know your thoughts, and without further ado, this is Cotton Stoops, and today's video is the final 2022 tier list of Lumian Legacy. Alright, so let's start off with the roamers first, and I'm gonna explain the Uber tier later. Just let me do the roamers first. So, I feel like a good baseline of what a roamer should be is Dusket. Dusket is a B plus tier roamer. I can see it going down to the B tier just because there are probably a lot more Lumians that could do its job better. But right now, Dusket's secret ability looks to be very good. In my opinion, it's probably going to be a good Lumian to be ran in Poison Barb teams, but obviously that's not going to be changing for a while because Poison Barbs is the inferior hazards to the Barbs hazards, so I can't really see Dusket making a big meta change in that way because Poison Barb still doesn't have great representation and is stopped very easily. But in terms of what it can do solo wise, it does not have a lot of good ways to deal with a lot of good Lumians. So Dusket's potential is high B plus tier. I can see it going down to the B or B minus, but this is what a roamer should be. It has its own niche, it's good at it, and it doesn't necessarily defeat the whole metagame. And opposite of that is Phasenaut. Phasenaut is probably one of the best Lumians in the entire game, mainly because of its ability Malware, being able to take away abilities that are contact based or contact based moves. Once it hits Phasenaut can take away that ability. Phasenaut also has very strong moves in Zip Zap and Flash and Flee. It can also pivot out very well, and with its high base range attack, it can pivot out very strongly, and it doesn't need a lot of investment from what I've seen in order to hit hard, but it does need some investment. I'm not saying it doesn't need, but its speed tier is really solid, and Phasenaut can be a really good Lumian. Even though its range defense is 55, it is still really bulky in the melee side and kind of bulky on the range defense side. So when you pair all of these together, Phasenaut can provide a lot of utility with a lot of offensive pressure. It's bulky in the melee defense and it's decently bulky on the range defense side. It's really strong and it's just really good. And the reason it's not in the S tier is because there are earth types that can switch in on this thing. There are plant types that can be immune to its pivot moves. So it's not the most broken thing in the world, but I think that just attributes to how good Phasenaut is because there are still answers for this thing, but it's still really good. So yeah, A plus tier, I can see it going to the S tier. Now, something else that's kind of bad, and I'm going to be putting Imperior in the B tier. Now, I have not tested Imperior a lot, but Imperior to me seems pretty good offensively, but due to the fact that its coverage is kind of lacking compared to other dark types, and it doesn't have a lot of great utility, I would definitely prefer Vesperatu over this, or some other great dark types like Cephalops or something like that. And so it has to compete with a lot of those Lumians, and in its speed tier and its base attack, it has to compete with sweepers and cleaners. And from what I've seen, Imperior doesn't really offer that much. It gets walled by a lot of the melee walls, and it's very easily put to a stop by revenge killers and boots users. So I don't really see a good niche for Imperior other than Resentful, and even then, Resentful is not really the best thing in the world. So B tier, it's okay. I wouldn't really rank it any higher, mainly because I do not have enough research. Next one, we're going to be talking about Nebare. I think Nebare is, just like Dusket, a good niche Lumian. It's pretty good into the Pivot wise, it's also good defensively and can provide offensive pressure. Its coverage is very lacking, but I still think it's pretty good. But other than that, it has a lot of problems, mainly in its competition with Luminami, Phage, and some other defensive pivots, so it has to watch out for those. And of course, the Mare does have to compete with those stuff as well, and its coverage is lacking, so it's not going to be hitting as hard as other light and air types like Wintrix, Valkyrie, the Gargolems, Zeppelin, so it has to compete in that front, which is even worse for this thing. And when you compare it to its competition, it doesn't really offer a lot of things other than its ability, and that's not saying a lot. So I think its B plus tier is still good. If it wants to keep up in viability, then it probably needs to be an offensive Lumian, but even then, it's not even that great. So B plus tier just because it's capable of doing a lot of things. Next one, we're going to be talking about Nevermare. Nevermare is going in the B plus tier just because its ability is inconsistent. Other than that, its coverage is good, its bulk is good. It has to set up a few times to do it, unlike other sweepers and cleaners. But other than that, it's pretty good. It just has to have a more consistent ability. Next one is going to be, I don't know why Halvantic is here, but next one is going to be Cosmic Cracks. I'm kind of leaning for a B plus or B tier, mainly because I cannot see how good this thing is, but because of how bulky Cosmic Cracked is and how much power it can get with its setup and how well it's doing against more bulkier and less stronger Lumians, this can be really good, really fast. It just has to have some few setup. It obviously provides more with the regift seeker ability and just its bulk in general. It's so valuable having an ancient type offensive Lumian on your team, so that's pretty good. A- is where you can see it, and it can probably go higher. Same thing with Cosmere Unleashed, other than the bulk part. It's really strong, it has a great ability in Surrogate, it can pick up your Lumian's abilities. That limits your team building quite a bit, but that doesn't really take away because Cosmere Unleashed is really good. I'm not trying, and of course I'm not going to include Sorel in the discussion here, but Surrogate is really good. You can pick up Total Eclipse and Power Dapper, Terrifying. It's just really good, and for that reason alone, A- seems to be good. The reason why it's not going to be A and S tier, actually I could put this thing in the A, or actually I'll leave it down here. But that's the reason, mainly because it's just hard for me to put it up there when there is a lot of things that could stop it, specifically metal types. So yeah, A- is where I'm willing to put these guys in. And I'm pretty sure it's time for a controversial opinion. And that is Gargolem regular in the A, actually in the B plus. Now, Gargolem regular, like why would you put this here when Gargolem attack is pretty much better? Well, my main reason is mainly because Gargolem regular provides so much pressure even without setup. It's pretty good without that. Without setup, its coverage is still very oppressing. Earth and air is still really good. And of course, it can run Barbs, it can run Slapdown, it can run the moves that Gargolem attack is able to run. So this is still really good. I cannot put it up higher mainly because unlike Zeppelin and Wintrix, like stuff that I could compare it very easily, it doesn't have setup, its bulk is not really the best for long-term stuff. So B plus tier is where I'm willing to put it. Next one is a Kalos, and I'll probably put a Kalos into the B minus. It has nothing going for it when you compare it to a bunch of other water type offensive Lumians. When you compare it to, let's see, when you compare it to something like Deladrix, or that's not a good example. When you compare it to something like C.B.O, unlike C.B.O, well, let me just say it first. Its biggest problem is it has no good coverage for metal types or other types like that. It struggles with metal types a lot. It also struggles with bulky water types, and until we get an electric based move or something to hit those water types, Akalos is not getting anywhere. Its broad boost is good, and I admit it dishes out a lot of power. But when the metagame is very inclined into using water types like Luminami, Barblast, and Fiscarda, it's really hard for this to get up into the tier list. Alright, next one is Protogod. Protogod is in the same tier as the others. It's pretty good. It's just that the meta has kind of adapted to it now, so it has to be very aware with its analyze ability. And while you can say it could be a mixed Protogod, Protogod doesn't have that coverage in order to be that kind of juggernaut. So until it gets better melee moves or the meta kind of inclines it to the ranged version, I don't really see Protogod getting any higher than a B+. Next one is Gargolem Defense. I think Gargoleme's defense is kind of underrated, but it's still pretty mid. When you compare Gargolem Defense to a lot of the other walls, there is a very big problem, and that is its attack. Now, Driving Force Slapdown, Barbs is really good for something like this, and that's what's keeping it in the B tier role. But its attack stat gets really prominent when spirit types that are immune to brawler moves can set up very well on this thing. Pretty much anything with setup can just destroy Gargolem Defense, and if Gargolem Defense did not have Driving Force, then I think this thing would be so bad because it cannot do anything against those Lumians. So yeah, it's just not good. It's just very passive. It does provide a lot of utility, so I'm kind of leaning into the B+, but B is where I'll be putting this. Next one is probably Wobelisk. Wobelisk is a solid A-, mainly because it has Driving Force, which is pretty good to get rid of the Lumian's deck. Actually, Driving Force is not really that great on Wobelisk because of Ignorant, but it's great for predicting switches. Barbs is good on Wobelisk because Wobelisk's defensive typing can't take advantage of the Lumians that would like to set up Barbs, or not set up Barbs, but that would like to get rid of it, specifically air types, so that's good for it. Wobelisk's Ignorant ability allows it to be a soft check to most things that would like to set up. For example, I guess you could count Akalos in there as well, the new Lumian. Actually, the new Lumian kind of sucks, or is a bad example, but you know, on the long run, Wobelisk is going to be very good because it's a soft check to anything that would like to set up. So A- is where I'm willing to put it. It also provides a lot more strong coverage with Earth, Electric, Ice coverage, which is admittedly pretty strong, which allows Wobelisk to be offensively very good and utility based very good too. So A- for that. Next one is Gargolem Speed. It's going to be the B tier row, and the main reason why it's going to be here is because, well, it does provide barbs, and it does provide the ability to be able to outspeed everything, but it does not, unlike Gargolem Attack, it does not do any damage, and that's the main problem. When people know how to deal with this thing is pretty much dead weight. It's very frail. It has no damage whatsoever. It is only good for setting up barbs. It's like if you traded power for speed, but that speed isn't really doing anything when it's very frail and does not do any damage. I would prefer Gabademic a lot more than this thing. And honestly, people who think that this is good, they're just lying to themselves. Golem Speed is just a worse Gabademic in a sense. So yeah, B tier is where it goes. Next Lumian that I'll be talking about is Elephage. Elephage kind of stinks right now. It's just a worse phase shot, and what it has compared to other Lumians, which I would say like maybe Phase Dot, Kazune, Delodrix, it's less offensively oriented, and while it is technically bulky, it's probably not the best when you can use Phase Dot, who provides a lot more offensive pressure, and in this metagame, that they would much prefer power than, you know, whatever Elephage can bring. But I guess there is an argument to bring it up to the B+ and A-, but I just don't see it right now. And the final two Lumians that I will be ranking is Gargolem Attack, which I'm inclined to be putting it in the A tier. or A plus tier. Now, the reason why it's not S in my opinion is because until we see further testing, Gargolum attack is not one of the best Lumians in the entire game. It definitely is, but the main problem that I see with it is if anything outspeeds this thing, then it's pretty much dead in the water. Of course, running boots can counteract that, but boots users can outspeed this boots Gargolem attack. So even then, I kind of have to put that out there. It's very weak to priority, although we haven't seen a very good priority user in a while that's not banned. So I guess when you look at it, Gargolem attack is really powerful. It's one of the best Lumians, so yeah, I guess I could see the S tier ranking. And C.B.O is B tier. Yeah, all the roamers are pretty good. And the reason why C.B.O is not with its buddies in the A tier is mainly because it's only really good for stall teams that would like to get rid of barbs. And when I mean stall teams, I mean Phase Dot plus C.B.O encased. But the main reason why it's not any lower because when you pair with Phase Dot, unless you don't predict the barb setup, C.B.O Crack cannot allow any barbs on the field. It can get rid of Gobidemic's barbs if it switches it correctly, and Phase Dot can deal with Seardite's barbs as well as Wobelisks, and C.B.O in case can deal with Wobelisk as well. So it's really good with Phase Dot, but it's just really passive, so I can't put it any higher, and it's just setup fodder for the next thing to go. But I guess the main argument here is that Phase Dot just pairs so well with it because metal types that would like to switch it out C.B.O case, Phase Dot 9 times out of 10 can deal with them. So I guess, yeah, I guess I can see it. I guess I can see it in the A- or B+ tier. I'll be putting it in the B+. I'm most likely gonna die for this, but whatever. Alright, next up, we're gonna be talking about starters. Alright, I'm gonna be a bit more fast here. So, Zulon. A- tier because it has a niche in Zip Zap and Ancient War being able to outspeed most of the Lumians in the game, provide offensive pivot and utility-based pivots. Its coverage is kind of mid, but it does make up for it for its utility moves. It's fast, it's strong, and it's pretty good. It's probably A- or B+. Himber, B tier. It's pretty much dead right now because it does have to compete with that new Lumian. I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna try and name it, but it has to compete with that new Lumian, so Himber's viability is being questioned yet again. There are a bunch of bulky water types in this metagame that can kill Himber. And obviously, its coverage is not really as threatening as it was before because like I said earlier, and there are just a lot of better melee wall breakers in this game. Next up, Tatab. Solid A tier. Its coverage is really strong, its power is really strong as well. It can cripple walls with poison, it can cripple walls with barter boots as well. They can also use boots to outspeed the boots users, which is very good for late game cleaning and sweeping. Bulk Up can use Tatab to make its bulk even higher and set up its power. It's just really hard to put this anything lower. Next up, Vespratu, A- tier. I'm putting it in the A- tier just because I'm kind of afraid of how high I should put this thing because the Eclipse is still common. Although people still know how to deal with the Eclipse now, so it's a bit less threatening. And also compound that fact with Vespratu can pretty much do anything that it wants to. It can be a solid defensive Lumian, it can provide with solid priority, blood drain and slap down. It can be your fast cleaner or sweeper depending on how you look at it with its strong moves and setup. It can also be a juggernaut of all things or a jack of all trades where it can be everything that you want it to be but a bit weaker than everything else. Vespratu can basically be anything you want. Slash is really important for this thing now and I kind of have to realize that. So I cannot put this thing anything higher, but it's probably well deserved in the A tier. Alright, Luminami, S tier. Luminami is pretty much good on every team. It provides really good utility with Power Napper and Flash and Flee. It has a lot of good coverage, mainly in the melee side, because it can hit a lot of the typing super effectively. It also does have Rejuvenate if you're kind of worried about walls breaking through you. It's just really good. It can fit on semi-stall teams, stall teams, and offensive teams, so that's pretty good. Next one is Seer Knight. Seer Knight is in the A- tier mainly because of Lumians like Phage Knot being able to get rid of Seer Knight's barbs very easily, so you have to think a lot more harder with your Seer Knight picks, as well as the many air types, not air types, but the many earth types being introduced right now. We got Himber, Gargolem, Attack, and Gargolem regular. We also do have Tyrex and Cenomars being introduced as well. It's just really hard for Seer Knight to get going, and its coverage admittedly is still pretty good. I kind of find it not as threatening as it was before. It doesn't mean Seer Knight is still bad, I just think it does have a lot more competition, and of course it is competing with Wobblisk for that defensive barb setting role on a team. It's definitely still very good. I'm kind of willing to put it in the A tier, so yeah, that's where I'll be putting it. Next Lumian is Valkyrie, and I'm probably gonna put this down. Actually, Valkyrie is A minus with these guys. Now, actually, B plus Valkyrie. Now, I hate to admit it, but Valkyrie's power is a lot less threatening than it was before than everything else. Now, it's still really strong, but it does have to deal with a lot of the walls now because Tyrex is a solid check for it. Stratosaur is a really solid check for it. Malmer and Chartiki are common stuff that will get this thing out of the battle. There are a bunch of earth types and brawler types that will like to kill Valkyrie. Vesperatu's back in the metagame that will be able to threaten Valkyries out, and that speed tier of Valkyries is getting worse and worse as more faster Lumians are being introduced, making Valkyrie a slow Lumian. And unless Valkyrie gets more bulkier or faster with its Soul Burst evolution, I just cannot see Valkyrie being any good. Even if bulky offense does get a lot more prominence, I don't think Valkyrie's gonna be in that. So B plus tier for Valkyrie. It pains me to say this, but yeah, B plus tier. And I forgot to rank Ikazune. Alright, let's rank that. Ikazune is A tier. Because of its pivot moves being really strong, and its coverage also being strong as well, Ikazune can be your wall breaker, or it can be a offensive pivot that can bring momentum to your team. The only argument I can see for Ikazune is the fact that Phage Knot is a lot more better than Ikazune and it is a lot more preferred. Ikazune is still good, however, because it can run Raging Fire or Overcharge if it does, or whatever that secret ability is called. It can run that as well. Its power is still threatening, and its coverage is a lot more better than Phage Knot's, and of course it fits a lot more better on Hyper Offense, with like on par with Phage Knot and a lot more other stuff as well. And of course it does have access to barter boots, not barter, but it does have access to boots and power cuffs, which is pretty good. So it's kind of like the offensive version of Phage Knot, so I'd give it credit. It is solid A tier. Right, let's talk about the rest of the Lumians, which I'll be putting up on the screen right now. And by rest of the Lumians, I meant Navaris. My bad. Alright, so Lightning Round, Venilin B tier. This is really controversial, but Venilin is very easy to deal with. Its coverage or lack thereof is not really good. Its power is also really bad, so a lot of things could set up on this thing. Pure Poison or Pure Toxic is not as valiant as it was before because there are a bunch of earth types, a bunch of mine types that will be able to switch in and kill Venilin instantly. So it has to compete with that, and while I guess you can make the argument that it is B plus tier, which I'll be putting it actually, or actually B tier because of the many bulky waters. It's just so hard for Venolin to get in because pretty much almost all of the wall breakers here have some way to deal with Venolin. Like Ikazune can just pivot out, Valkyrie can just break through it, Cosmures hit it super effectively, the Gargoyles hit it super effectively, Nemare sets up, and a lot more. It's just really hard for this thing to get going without, you know, being ran on pure stall. So yeah. Tangerine is a bit of the same, except it is not as bad as Venolin because it does have some potential and, you know, some new coverage, not new coverage, but power with Body Crash, so it can use its melee defense and rack up damage with that. It also does have Resilience, one of the best defensive abilities in the entire game. It's a really good beginner melee defense Lumian that you could use for a lot of teams, which is pretty good. But actually, just because of that, it's just a solid soft check to most things in this game. But like I said, it is a soft check, so it's not gonna be the best thing for every single Lumian. In fact, this metagame is slowly adapting to Tundralin, but honestly, I cannot see this thing going down anytime soon. It's still gonna be used, but honestly, if you want to use something else, just use Obsidian because Tundralin doesn't seem it for me as of right now. It's kind of lacking, and most of the Varia evolutions are, but it's kind of lacking for me. Next one, Zeppelin. Zeppelin has kind of lost value for me because Gargolems now exist as better air types. Wintrix has proved itself to be one of the best air types in the entire game. And of course, one of the best defensive air types like Stratosaur is being used a lot more than Zeppelin. So that kind of proves it to me that Zeppelin is not really as much value as it was before. It definitely does fit better on bulkier teams, and of course that's still pretty good because bulky teams are bulky teams, because Zeppelin needs time to set up Provoke and Peace of Mind. But why use that when you can use other fast-paced Lumians that can just get into the battle very quickly, deal some damage, get out? And that's mainly the thing. If you want to use Zeppelin, you have to orient around the team to its own weaknesses. And instead of doing that, why can't you just pick Lumians that already fit well with each other and a lot of other Lumians with the meta playstyle? The meta playstyle I'm talking about is Hyper Offense and Semi-Stall. So I don't really see Zeppelin being good in this metagame, but it's still pretty good with what it has. So out of respect, I'm keeping it in the A-. Some trash Lumians that'll be getting that out of the way is Servalin and Buzzlin. Buzzlin still has a niche, but honestly, because of the amount of metal types in this game and the amount of ice types that I expect to be rising up is a lot worse for Buzzlin than it was before. Also, bug types is being a lot more prominent with Garbantus and, you know, Harvestect, so it has to deal with that as well in both competition and in 1v1s. The metagame's brawler types also is being a bad thing on Buzzlin, and of course the over demand of high-paced, high-powered Lumians is still on the demand, and honestly, Buzzlin doesn't really fit that. I could see Buzzlin being pretty good if it did get better coverage and possibly new pivot moves, but I don't really see anything for this. Next up is Servalin. Servalin is just the worst Borak and Trumbull. Doesn't have much going for it other than boast, but right now we just do not need any Lumians that can set up and that need a lot of time to set up and is still really slow. Yeah, sorry Servalin. Next up we have Pyrolin. Pyrolin is a good example of a one-hitting machine with Flame Shell and Volcanic. It does sound like a meme, but it's still really good. Pyrolin can set up to destroy anything that is not resistant, and that's really scary. But other than that, Pyrolin doesn't really seem to have any other niche other than that. I do see some weaknesses in Pyrolin, mostly because of the many water types in this game. So honestly, I'm kind of inclining to put it in the B+ or B tier, but I still think Pyroland is still pretty good. You could also run that setup set in my HDC video of that, so you can run that as well. It's pretty good, A minus. Next is Wrestling. Probably, I want to say it's worse than these guys. Its spirit types destroy it. There are a bunch of spirit types getting into the game. Also, general water melee bulky water types can deal with wrestling very well. And the common staples of the semi-stall and bulky stall teams just the curb stomps wrestling. Also, hyper offense is demanding more power and speed, and honestly, wrestling only provides power with one move only. You know what I'm talking about. So it doesn't really offer much there. I can see it moving down along with some other Lumians in the B tier, but still pretty bad. Next one is Wendelin. Wendelin is still pretty strong. I would put it in the B plus tier if it weren't for the fact that actually because okay. Alright, that's a bit better. Wendelin provides a lot more pressure with its coverage than what people might think. But the main problem is, unless you're a bulky water type or a common semi-stall melee wall like Tundralin and Obsidian and a bunch of the other melee walls in this game, you are gonna be not having a lot of trouble with this thing. It's really hard for Wendelin to get going as of right now because why would you use Wendelin when you can use something better? But I just think it doesn't have enough, or rather, I think scratch that for Volana. I said I think it's still decent. It's still pretty good. Next one, well, Kirillin. Kirillin, I'd say, has a worse of a niche than Wendelin, mainly because of its hasty ability. It hits very hard, but its coverage is kind of dying out a bit, mainly because of its only good coverage move in being Adaptive Assault, so it is getting a bit worse there. And of course, hasty is really bringing this thing back because it's only going to be hitting for what 85% of the time with your hasty, and that's even worse with your other moves that are less accuracy, so that's pretty bad for that. And so yeah, with that Vari out of the way, let's talk about the event Lumians. Okay, so let's talk about the event Lumians. Now I'm gonna start with Halvantic, and if I want to mention Halvantic, I kind of have to mention, where is it? I kind of have to mention Joltooth as well, because they are basically the same Lumian except Joltooth is a lot more worse. Halvantic is pretty good, its coverage is pretty good, it's strong, well its power is pretty decent, it just struggles with earth types. Looking at you, Tyrex, and it is a pretty good counter to the bulky water meta that has been going around. So Halvantic seems pretty good. I'm inclined to putting it in the A tier, if not for Phagenot and Ikizune and Zulong, all being really good rivals, or not rivals, but competition to compete for that electric slot and for more Lumians that we'll be mentioning down later. But Halvantic seems pretty good. However, its coverage, or not coverage, but its defensive typing seems to be a bit on the lower end of things, mainly because it does get hit very super effectively by what's common in the metagame, so that makes it worse. And on top of the fact that it's just really easy to predict a Halvantic because they're most likely going to be clicking actually, well, its coverage is pretty, it's not as scary as I think it's going to be, because the clips can switch in on Gnarly Gash and a bunch of earth types can switch in on Thunder Crash, so it only has a few moves to hit without being immune to some stuff, and that is usually a pretty bad move. It does have some decent setup, but I prefer Boots Halvantic in my opinion, so that its weak defensive typing is not really exposed by faster offensive Lumians. So A minus is where I'm gonna put it. Joltooth is a bit more bulkier. Actually, no, Halvantic is bulkier than Joltooth, I'm pretty sure. And it is slower. And it has worse coverage. Yeah, there's not much to say. Alright. Harvesect is A tier. I would say it's a bit more higher, but what Harvesect provides defensive wise and utility wise is still really good. If you want to have strong coverage, then Harvesect is just the one to go to. It has Bug, Spirit, Earth, and Brawler coverage, which is all pretty good. It also does have a great defensive typing, being able to be immune to Brawler. It is resisting Earth, which is two really pressing types in this metagame that is much needed in most defensive cores, which is pretty good. Harsec can fit in defensive and probably more bulkier but offensive teams nonetheless, which is still pretty good for it. So I don't think there's much saying that can bring Harvesec down. While there is a bunch of, not a bunch, but there is some limits that can take it down, like Obsidian, it's still pretty good, and it pretty much solidifies itself into the A and A minus tier for a long time, unless most air types and ice types gets common into the metagame, which might be this metagame. So yeah. Next one is Wintrix. Now, unlike some other YouTubers, I think Wintrix is going to be an A plus Lumian just on its own. Its wise ability is really good, which is carrying this thing, and its coverage is really strong as well. It's pretty fast. It just has good coverage and wise. There's not a lot to say about this, but Wintrix fits comfortably in a lot of offensive cores. Its coverage is really strong, and it's really balanced as well. There are some stuff that can deal with Wintrix, but Wintrix has a lot of great teammates it can use with it. So Wintrix looks pretty good. A plus tier. Alright, Sea Drake. Another one of my hot takes, and this is gonna be in the B tier. Sea Drake doesn't have a lot of things going for it, mainly because it needs, in my opinion, it needs a bit more mixed setup to get going, and its coverage is not really as diverse as I hoped, mainly because of that plant coverage. Unless you're like Totem, Sea Drake's not going to be doing a lot, and when you compare Totem to Sea Drake, Totem is just more threatening offensively because of its coverage and what it has in its base stats. Sea Drake is a bit slower. Its defensive typing definitely suffers a lot more because of that speed tier. So yeah, I'm kind of inclined to putting it in the B minus along with these guys, but I don't think it's that bad necessarily. So yeah, I think this is good. Next one is Haganash. Haganash is solid, but it doesn't excel in anything. It's just good at a lot of things, and that doesn't really equate to anything really good unless you're like Vesperatu, who can do things really well, like all together. Haganash can provide offensive utility and bulk, but it doesn't really do that thing really well or like it doesn't really do those things together really well. It can only do one thing really well and do the other thing really well. So I can't really put it higher or lower. It's definitely decent, but it's a definition of a mid Lumian. It's good at most things, but it's not really the best at them. So yeah. Next one is Fiskarna, and actually I'm gonna move these down a bit. Next one is Fiskarna. Fiskarna looks to be a really polarizing Lumian in the next few metagames, mainly because of its ability to switch into most offensive Lumians, its ability regift to bounce back hazards, its ability to set up, which is pretty good, and actually yeah, it's pretty good. And while its coverage is kind of lacking, its defensive utility makes up for that. Fiskarna can work in defensive teams, and it can possibly work in offensive teams just to bounce back hazards and provide some offensive utility against more defensive Lumians on the other team, which is honestly pretty good for Fiskarna. I think it can actually, it's going to be the A minus tier, because it just provides so much utility. I can see it going the B plus tier for sure, but bottom A minus is where I can see this thing. So yeah. And Festifer, it's not that good. It suffers like other ice types. It suffers from the fact that most metal types and water types are a lot. I have a high chance of switching in on this thing, and unlike other ice types, actually, I'm not gonna say that. Festifer just really suffers with bulky water types. It doesn't really have a lot of things going for it because there are a bunch of other Lumians that can do it better, like the new Lumian and Himber, and arguably a Kalos. So, yeah, it doesn't really do that well, mainly because of its defensive typing and competition. I can see it in the C tier. Yeah, it's that bad. Next one is Sinogar, and honestly, I cannot see this thing in the B tier right now. It's just really bad with its Spite ability. Spite is arguably pretty good, but right now, Spite doesn't really have a lot of good representation because Spite just halves the opponent's HP over and over, and unless you're like powerful like an Ikazune, Sinogar's not going to be able to finish them off because they're too bulky for Sinogar. It just doesn't have a lot of good coverage. Its setup is kind of decent, but other Lumens can do that better, so yeah. Spreezy is also a definition of a mid Lumian. It can do a bit of things, but it's just not excelling at a lot of those things. And Harvestech is honestly a better defensive bug type. And finally, we have Yursnak and Baneki. Baneki, I think, is in the A- minus tier at the very least. Mainly because with what Baneki has, its defensive typing is really good. It can use poison to cripple every single wall, I'm pretty sure, except Stratosaur, of course, which is really good for Baneki. Its coverage of Plan and Earth, while not being good at first glance, is actually really oppressive. And only a few things like Stratosaur, Obsidian, I'm pretty sure with Mysterious Dust, and arguably like some toxic types, or not toxic types, never mind. Baneki is just really good. Poison and Earthquake, or whatever it has, Landslide, is one of the best combinations in the entire game because it can just cripple anything that's not Stratosaur, and that's really oppressive. I can see this thing going in the A tier, but actually I'll move these guys up. It's going to be in the A tier mainly because of what it has. I can see it going down a bit, but what it has is just really oppressive, and it's really good for what Baneki has, and arguably it's just really good, honestly. And yeah, your stack B tier, what it has is not really as valued as it was before, so it's not really good for your stack at all. It just kind of sucks for it. So yeah, that sucks. It doesn't have a lot of good things, and of course there's not a lot of good things that would like to abuse your stack because hyper offense doesn't really need a pivot like your stack. So yeah, it's just kind of in a weird limbo where it's pretty good, but most teams won't need your stack. So yeah. And with the secure categories out of the way, let's just start throwing Lumians fast. Colossotrops is in the B tier, or B tier mainly because of its bad defensive typing, and unless you're using pivots to build around it, which is admittedly really restrictive, Colossotrops is not going to get a lot of things done. It can definitely do that with the right support, but it's just taking a lot of time to set up. Garglash is in the B minus, or actually, it's in the B. It is in the C plus tier, mainly because of the many bulky waters and melee walls that can just deal with this outright, and the overall metagame would like Lumians that are more powerful and faster than Garlash, so it's just dead in the water. Hunter is still a plus for me because it's one of the best coverage in the game. It has very few defensive walls that can wall it outright like Obsidian and I guess Barblast, and its just coverage is just really good. On top of that, its moves are now 100% accuracy, I'm pretty sure, and 70 base power. That's really good on top with Power Jaw. Next up, we have Obsidian, just like which is just like Harvsec. It's really good, mainly because of what it provides. It has a good ability, good defenses, strong coverage, strong setup. It's just really good, and there is not a lot of things that can take advantage of it very easily thanks to that strong coverage. Setamar is also A tier because, like Obsidian and Harvestek, it can provide a lot of things, specifically offensive pressure with its coverage. It's great defensive typing, so it can use its range defense a lot better, and it's bulky on the melee side as well, which is pretty good. And I can see this going down because of the ice types becoming common, but honestly, this thing is just a definition of a balanced Lumian. Next up is Swolder, and honestly, I think Swolder is going to be in the minus tier or B tier, mainly because of the ice types and air types that plague this metagame. And of course, the wall breakers have been gaining in power a lot recently, and Soldier cannot just keep up with the power without setup or without better bulk, so it's just kind of in a weird limbo. Same thing with Terraclaw, except for the fact that it just cannot have any recovery right now, and its defensive typing does not do it any favors with air and ice types being everywhere in the metagame, as well as Barbs being able to wither down Terraclaw very fast. Stratosaur is also a good Lumian. I kind of want to put it in the A plus tier, but Stratosaur is pretty good. It could provide a lot of pressure with Magnify and its coverage. It has great defensive utility uh, with its defensive typing and its ability. It fits on a lot of teams very easily because of that Earth weakness, which a lot of people hate. So it's just really good for Stratosaur right now. Your Soul, which I see a lot of people arguing it's not Uber, it's still Uber. Nothing has changed. It's still very oppressive against plant types. It doesn't provide any time soon. Every time a new metal type comes or a new water type comes, bulk seemingly pretty good is now a lot more better. Pretty good for it. Gastro. Actually, I think Gastroke is a bit worse, or it's a bit better than Dictation. There's so much videos explaining why Gastroke is so bad. I don't really need to explain it to you guys. Same thing with WikiWiki, except it provides a little bit more utility, but that's not saying much. So there you go. Krakaloa in a lot of ways is a bit better, but a lot worse. Haagen-Dazs, it focuses on one thing, but there is a lot more things that can do it better. For example, Gargoyle Defense does its job a lot more better, and preferably walls prefer to have setup and power instead of nothing and just bulk. Yeah, it's not parasitize, with its body crash and battering ram abilities. With now, it can also run Burrow. And in case you didn't know, Bug and Brawler is a really strong, or not strong, it is a really good offensive typing. When you compare with that with its high speed, good bulk, it's just really strong. Also, Garbantis is now back with the ability to be a pretty good Lumian in all fronts, so it can take melee hits, use that to set up its own damage and speed, so that's pretty good. I'm actually going to be putting it in the A- tier just because of the potential of having, well, we do already have a lot of air types, so that kind of hurts Garbantis, but also ice types will definitely be rising in this meta because of the Christmas stuff, and that kind of has a lot of issues for Garbantis right now. And of course, Earth types is going to be a lot more prominent, or not a lot more, but there is Earth type, competition. So I kind of want to put this down a bit more, but it's still looking pretty good for Garbantis, honestly. So yeah, Mocho. I kind of think this thing fell off because of the new Lumian got its coverage. So yeah, Mocho is still pretty good. I still think its coverage is really good. But when you compare this to the other Lumian, who's a lot more stronger, who has better setup, better speeds here, it's just really hard for to see a reason for Mocho to be used over that Lumian. So honestly, I can see this in the B plus or B tier row. And honestly, I'll put it in the B tier row just because I don't think it cannot compete with these guys right now. Guard drone, same thing with these guys. It just cannot simply compete with the metagame right now. There are a bunch more better range attacking wall breakers that could do its job a lot more better and who can set up or deal a lot of damage consistently. Guard drone is not that Lumian right now, and it can get better, but I don't think it's going to be a lot better anytime soon. Next one we have Barblast. I think Barblast is an A tier or A minus. Earth types are a lot more dangerous right now, and that obviously hurts Barblast's chances of being higher on this tier list. I still think that Barblast is a pretty solid wall, all things considered. It's just that Gargoyle attack is a lot more common, Phage Dot, and a lot more electric types like Alvantic and Metatoad are also adapting to this thing, and I guess you can include Ikazune here as well. So yeah, I still do think that having a niche to take out Totab is still pretty good. Also, it's still pretty powerful compared to what it was before. So I think Barblast is pretty good, one of the best walls right now. Alright, next one we have Volcaloa. I still think this is still pretty underrated. Its coverage is really strong, it has really good setup, and it has a decent speed tier. But it kind of needs that setup in order to do really good damage, so I'm just gonna say B plus because it seems pretty good on paper. I've tested it out multiple times and I've swept a lot of people with it, but to be real, it is not really the best when you compare to other sweepers and cleaners. Next up, we have C.B.O, who honestly, I can see it going down a bit, but when you use C.B.O correctly with pivots and supports and having good offensive wall breaker teammates, this is going to be really, really good. C.B.O can provide a lot of damage very, very fast, and unless you're not Barblast or Obsidian, you're pretty much going to get smoked. So yeah, C.B.O is looking to be a pretty solid Lumian. It's just that it is on the lower speed tier end of things as well. So it kind of has to compete with speed tiers, and it is a lot slower than a lot of the wall breakers. So if it gets going, it gets going, and it is a good example of a good wall breaker Lumian. That's pretty balanced. Next up, we have Deladrix. Now, I'm gonna not address my points on Deladrix because I already gave my thoughts on it on my Deladrix video. So yeah, A plus tier for me. Next up, we have Malmerk, who I actually gonna rank in the B tier mainly because of the toxic types that are being in this metagame as of right now. There are a lot of stuff that can deal with this very well, and honestly, actually, and with the fact that the things that it would like to wall before, like Valkyrie, is not in this metagame anymore, it's kind of concerning of how this thing's usual viability is going down. And of course, the bug types like Harvesect and Garbantis, and the dark types like Vespratu is rising as well, and Deligix as well as too. It's looking like that Malmberg is not going to be welcomed very much in this metagame. And like I said, its power is not as strong as the other Lumians, so it will be a lot more prone to setup. I do think that Malmberg does have potential in the B plus or A minus, but I'm just gonna put it in the B tier for now. Next up, we have Iguana, who I actually think is a solid B plus tier, not an A minus tier as it was before. There's just a lot more stuff that can now deal with it, like the new earth types and the new water types that can deal with this thing pretty well. And of course, Boneki being also pretty good too. It does have a good niche in walling some of the air types like Wintrix and Stratosaur. But I don't really see this thing good because while it does do good in some situations, most of the wall breakers have adapted enough to the point where Iguana is not really a threat. So honestly, it's a B plus tier for me. Next up, we have Avatros, who is probably a B tier. I don't really see this thing getting any much better because of the new ice types now being in this metagame. Tyrex being one of the most common things in this metagame, as well as Obsidian, Obsidian, and Cetamars, which makes that even worse for it. And Tongilin also being a pretty big part in this metagame as well. I don't think Avatros has any chance in this metagame, and it's kind of just like these guys who do have potential, but it's not really the best. So Revenine has been rising in the ranks lately, mainly because of the meta's inclination of hyper offense and more power and more speed. And of course, Revenine is the best Lumian for that job, honestly. In the wall breaking, or not wall breaking, in the revenge killing side of things. And Revenine honestly provides a lot of power. It kind of needs its vengeance ability to get going, but once it does, Revenine is going to be a pretty good revenge killer. I'm pretty sure there are a bunch of things that are better at revenge killing, but I think Revenine is a solid A minus. It might be a bit lower, but you can fight me on that. Next one, Tyrex, S tier, provides so much pressure, not so much pressure, but provides so much defensive utility. Its coverage is really good. The fact that it fits on all Lumian Legacy teams is just amazing. It's just an amazing feat on its own. And just like Luminami, it's just really essential on a lot of teams if you want to make things very successful. So, S tier for Tyrex. It's just really good. Samurai is in the same tier, is in the same position as, well, it's in its own position in the case where it provides a lot of pressure with its coverage. It has a lot more chances to set up with its ability to rev up and sharpen, and it's just really good offensively. It has good coverage, which allows it to hit a lot of things super effectively, which is pretty nice. So yeah, Revenine looks to be a pretty, not Revenine, but Samurai. I keep getting these names mixed up. But Samurai looks to be a pretty good Lumian so far. I can see it in the B plus tier, but right now, Samurai's coverage is pretty dangerous. Right, let's look at Snagoop, who I think is probably in the B plus tier. That's mainly because of the many ways the metagame can now deal with it and wall it. It's just really hard for this thing to get going without a lot of supports that obviously is not worth running. So honestly, yeah, B plus tier for it, sadly. Next up, we have Gobidemic. And honestly, if Gobidemic did not have barbs, then this would be a totally different discussion. So yeah, A for Gobidemic and A for keeping Hyper Offense alive. Next one, we have Oxydrake, who honestly I think is a B plus A minus tier. It still has the same things that it has before. It has good defensive utility. Its coverage, while not being the best as it was before, definitely pretty good. It does have Rejuvenate, I'm pretty sure, and it's just pretty good for Oxydrake as of right now. I do think there is some issues with it, specifically the with the Earth types being in this metagame, and it's just really hard for this thing to get going defensively unless you're pairing this thing in a semi-stall setting. It's definitely good for Oxydrake. I can see it A minus, but B plus tier is where I'm putting it. Next up, we have Banfino, who's honestly not really that good of a Lumian. I kind of overhyped this thing, I'm pretty sure, in my last tier list, but Sap Plant Dodge is not that good. And it's obviously, if you want to run a defensive speedy set or an offensive set, there is a bunch of more plant types that is better at that job, specifically Nevermare and Tatab, who do it a lot more better. So honestly, I can't really see this thing being a lot more higher than the B tier. Same thing with C.B.O, who will actually be putting in the B minus tier, mainly because it does not have anything going for it. There are a lot more better brawler types, better bug types, and it gets walled by a lot of defensive waters and melee walls in this entire game, so it's not really worth using C.B.O at all. Arapaigo, I kind of want to put it down in this tier as well, but Arapaigo looks to be pretty decent. I haven't really tested this thing a lot, so I don't really know where I should put this. But right now, Arapaigo looks to be very outclassed by its peers, which sucks because Arapaigo is not really the best for that kind of stuff. And honestly, if its coverage is actually pretty good, so I'll consider putting it up here. But Arapaigo, what it has right now is not very consistent, and until it gets good stuff, I don't think it's going to be getting any higher or lower anytime soon. It's just a solid B tier Lumian where it can be good in the right setting, but most of the time it's not going to be that Lumian. Next up, we have Borak, who I'm going to put alongside Colossotrops for the same reason as it. It can get going, but it's really slow and really frail to actually do things. And while Quick Pounce is admittedly a way to solve that, it definitely does not hit a lot harder than the rest of the wall breakers in this metagame, so B is where I'm putting it. Infernix is also going in the B or B tier row, mainly because Luminami has just been hammering down the fact that it's the better Lumian, and a lot of more defensive Lumians are being picked over this thing, so its preference is even there. Chartiki and Seer Knight is just being picked more as a defensive fire type, and this doesn't really offer anything other than Gus and I guess Phoenix Flame, but Phoenix Flame is a more of a selfish move. So yeah, I don't really see this thing being good anytime soon. So yeah, it just sucks for it. Next up, we're getting down to the last stretch of Lumians. Lumelo. It's kind of in the same realm as Venolin. It's outclassed by a lot of things, and it cannot do much when it is on the field, except run barbs. But again, that is not really that good. So yeah, Lumelo, I don't really have a lot to say about it. It's just not that good because its defensive typing admittedly is good, but it doesn't really have a lot of things going for it. Trumbull, like I said, it's a better Servalin, and it's on par with Borak and Colossotrops, so yeah, pretty good. Waka Laka, I cannot put this thing in B minus, but I kind of have to. The B tier is getting filled pretty quickly, but honestly, I think Waka Waka is still good. The fact is, unless you're running Bane of Haste, this thing's gonna be hit first and get hit super hard because of its defensive typing. It's just not that good, honestly, in a regular setting. The Rogo in the B tier, actually B minus. My god, this thing is so bad. It's a worse Gobidemic in all fronts. It has no offensive pressure. Its defensive typing brings it back so much. And its B tier is very competitive in a sense where a lot of those things are really offensive oriented. So not a lot for Dorogo. Dyborg, probably B tier, or actually I'll bring this up and I'll move this down. Alright. Dyborg is a solid B tier. I don't think it has a lot of things going for it specifically because actually, why not? I'll put it in the B plus tier. It does have a good tank ability. Um, its coverage is pretty good. It can be a mixed juggernaut, which is a pretty good thing as well. So yeah, B plus tier for Dyborg. Icicle again, not again, but Icicle is kind of like these guys in the tier as well. It can do a lot. It can do some things, but it's mostly outclassed by the Lumians above, which sucks for it as well. Florent is is in the same realm as these guys. Actually, Florent is a bit better because of Magnify. I'm pretty sure it has Magnify now. Umbrat, honestly, it's in the C plus tier, and Luxor, which is actually Luxor is B minus, Umbrat is B. They are both solid Lumians except for Luxor, but Umbrat doesn't really have a lot of things going for it in terms of offensive wise, and Luxor is just a really bad light type. It's just not really good, and it's not worth running because almost everything can wall this thing, range defense wise, of course. Lotox is also an example of a Lumian that is pretty good, but is outclassed by a lot of the Lumians up here. Same goes for... Not actually, I think Taoshinu's good. But I think the main problem is it can only do one thing, and that is tear down. And unless you want to run bulk up, which I don't think is worth it at all, and you can just run 2 moves, Taoshinu cannot do a lot of things. It is a soft check to most of the meta game, but unlike other soft check based Lumians, it cannot do a lot of things without, a lot of support. It kind of needs that extra bump in order to do a lot of things. And right now, Taoshinu can only do, it can only get rid of hazards, and it can only hit not really the best. So B plus for it. Ragoon, B tier, and actually it's in the same level as these guys. I don't really need to explain it to you guys. It doesn't really hit hard, and its only niche is taking items, which I guess it's good, but it's not really the best at all. And honestly, most Lumians can function without their items except boots users. So while it does provide a good utility with getting rid of items, I think just using Vesperatu is just better for that purpose. Munch Wheel, I kind of want to put this in the B tier and put this down. Munchwheel is, in a sense, a pretty good Lumian, all things considered. It's just having a lot of hard time with setting up because, of course, it cannot do that all the time. It's arguably, its defensive typing is pretty good, as well as its setup being pretty good and its coverage being good. But honestly, there's not a lot of reasons to use this when you can use other setup sweepers who have better coverage and better setup. So Munchwheel, I can see it being higher, but right now it's just a B tier. And wait, yeah, actually, kind of want to put Avatros down, but it's fine. Right, Shachi, A minus tier, actually B plus. Because it has so much power, it's still pretty good. So Shachi is going to be good in that realm as well. Also, it its coverage is a lot more better now with Thunderstrike, I'm pretty sure. And its speed tier is getting a lot more slower, but it's still pretty good to outspeed most of the walls and, of course, hit them super effectively. But the main problem I see with this is its frail nature. It's always has been its weakness, and it's even more prominent with a lot of fast Lumians. It's definitely good, but it's in the same realm as Valkyrie, where its speed tier suffers a lot. And finally, we got the last stretch of Lumians, which I'll just put up here just for the sakes of it. Skellig, I kind of forgot that was a thing, honestly. And that is all the Lumians. I won't bother to rank Pyramide because it's not really worth it. And yeah. Alright. Skellig, B minus. I don't really need to explain. Actually, Drudge is pretty good. Drudge is pretty good for Skellig because it can set up, and its coverage is admittedly pretty decent, but I don't think it's worth putting it praising it any higher. It definitely does have potential, but I don't really see it as of right now. Buneri or Buneri, I don't really know this thing's potential ever since it came out. I still don't know. So I'll just put it D plus, and yeah, I know it could copy Lupin, so it's the best, quote unquote, best revenge killer in this game. So that's something. So yeah, Boonery, B plus tier. Same thing, actually not the same thing, the opposite for Lyricat, and Mewtwo is worse. Now, Lyricat is better than Mewtwo because and it provides it's faster and it has Hypnotize. Hypnotize Magnify with a great speed tier is really good, and its coverage is arguably a bit better than Mewtwo's because Mewtwo has no coverage. And in this metagame, speed is a lot more valued on offensive teams than what Mewtwo has, specifically a bit more bulkier attributes. So just because of that reason, I think Littercat is better than Mewtwo. And that is it. Finally, I can stop doing this. Oh, Cinemoth. Um, it's like B minus. There's not really a lot of things to say about it because I don't really see this Lumian being good in a lot of teams, mainly because it suffers with its defensive typing. It doesn't really hit hard unless you Snore Spores and then Magnify. But even then, plus for Magnify doesn't really one-shot or 2-hit KO most of the defensive stuff. So yeah, it's pretty mid. And it's not really the best thing in the world. So yeah, this is my whole tier list. I'm just gonna zoom out so you can all see it. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. And this video will be served, like I said earlier, served as the final tier list of this year and a basis of what's going to be featured in the 2023 tier lists that I'll be making later next year. Hopefully you found this video informational, and like and subscribe if you want to see more. This is Cotton Stoops, and remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.